I grew up in Maine, in a rural college town. I was maybe 14 or so when this happened. I'm now 23. I remember this clear as day, and I've never been able to explain it. In fact, I'm often embarrassed telling people, as I struggle to trust it happened because it's so bizarre. It was a late spring or early summer night. A girlfriend and I decided to walk into town and hang out on this walking bridge that crossed over the railroad tracks in my town. We went for walks and often ended up there as it was quiet, and made us feel like little badasses to sit on the side of the bridge with our feet dangling over the tracks. So we're talking and looking at the stars when we notice these two orbs of light kind of orbiting each other, almost as if they're playfully teasing one another, moving in and moving out in proximity in this strange way. They moved quite fast and seemed to be moving upward and to the right slowly, mostly staying in the same general area. We got really quiet and watched them for at least 20 minutes. We couldn't figure out what it could be, especially as we lived 2 hours from the nearest city and hardly had any light pollution. After a while, we decided to head home as it was 10:30 or so, and it was about a 20-minute walk back to my house. The bridge we were on was located in back of the public library, next to an old schoolhouse that was used as a community center and thrift store. On the other side of the bridge was a low-income retirement and apartment area. To reach the street, we had to go past the schoolhouse and through a small community garden, as well as parking lot before making it to the street. As we turned to go, we were perfectly alone. We hadn't seen anybody around for the hour we were there. As I said, it was a quiet, sleepy town. It's dark as we turn to go, but we don't see anything out of the ordinary. The parking lot is lit and empty. Before leaving, we take one last look at the lights, which are still pulsating and dancing in and around each other. When we turn back, we freeze. In the middle of the parking lot ahead, lit by a street lamp, is a hunched-over man in an overcoat, and what I remember to be a hanging chained pocket watch by his side. He appeared so suddenly, there was no time to think. We ran. We ran to the left, up the hill and back of the library so fast, I lost my bracelet that I always wore. We didn't stop until we were across the bridge to the other side of town where I lived. Walking back out of breath, we hardly had words for what happened. We could barely talk about it that night, and even the next day after we went back to retrieve my bracelet, proof of what had happened as it was on the grass where I'd lost it, we still couldn't talk about it. But deep down, I know there was a link between the lights and the creature that pretty much materialized out of nothing. When I did mention it to my brother down the line, he chalked it up to be lights from the airport in the town over. I think it's too far away, and I'd never seen lights chase each other like that, let alone in skies that are always clear, and that I'd looked at often. I used to think that it was an old man from the apartments on the other side of the bridge, but that doesn't make sense either. He didn't feel human, or even ghostly. Sometimes I think I saw a time traveler. He appeared in no time at all and had this ineffable, eerie quality. I've never been so afraid. I've had a lot of paranormal visitations, signs, etc., but those feel very different in nature and possess a different quality, whether those experiences were positive or negative. This, however, was my first alien experience. Inhuman. I don't even know what words begin to describe it. It felt so unnatural, I guess. And that's what instilled me with the most fear, I think. It's been a long time. Quite honestly, I think this had to be around 2007 or 2008. But I understand memory does not serve best here in terms of time frame. But the events are exact. It was Halloween night, just leaving Salem, Massachusetts. The night was clear and dark, and the roads faded with the hum of a vehicle. I don't know where along the road this was exactly, but there was a forest to the right, and just up ahead was a busy bridge. Spiraling lights caught my attention. Orange and red dots that circled a metal saucer shape and spun and moved in free air over the bridge and diagonally down into the forest. I figured a gimmick, a prank for Halloween, as that is so obvious. But it went over the bridge and into the forest. The closest it got to me was you stacked two sedans on top of one another, and you could reach it. That's how low it went. It was the size of about 2 cars, but your typical metal chrome, light circling flattened edges, and the bottom half was flattened at a certain point as well. I do not believe in little green men, which, by the way, all known alien instances by people derive from the War of the Worlds novel and telecast. The aliens most people describe are the farm animals as iterated in the story. That said, by definition, this certainly was an unidentified flying object. But I was never able to find out what, or how. I have this memory from when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I grew up in a small town in rural southern Rhode Island on the edge of Acadia State Forest. The memory is very brief, lasting no more than 30 seconds. I have no memory of any events before it or after it, which just adds to the high strangeness. It's summertime, and I'm standing in a clearing in the area of the woods behind my house I used to play in frequently. And there in front of me, and about 30 to 40 feet off the ground, is this gunmetal colored object that looks like the typical 2 pie plates pressed together. It's just sitting there in the sky, completely silent, hovering, and I'm just standing there staring up at it. Time feels like it's standing still, and I'm frozen in place with this feeling in me of abject horror. Terror, like I've never felt anything like since. Then all of a sudden it takes off diagonally into the atmosphere at an impossible speed, without a sound. It practically disappeared in a blur. I'd like nothing more than to be able to say it was just a dream, but I've never had a dream that felt as authentic as that. I can still feel the grass between my toes, and the sun beating down on my head. The feeling in my gut at that moment was a once-in-a-lifetime feeling. So far. Also at that point in my life, I was woefully unexposed to such ideas. I didn't even have a TV in my house until I was 12. Unthinkable, I know. Sure, I had heard of flying saucers. I don't believe I had any knowledge that they were supposedly silent, and that they moved like it did for me, with a total disregard for inertia, at mind-bending speed. Now, if this were the whole story, I could get behind the idea that it was just a fabrication of childhood or whatever. But there's been some recent information that has just come to light. I was talking to my parents last Sunday, and somehow the subject of UFOs came up, and I reiterate my little story. First, my mother tells me that the woman that lived in our house before us believed she was being abducted by aliens. So often so, that she had created a rudimentary panic room in the house. Okay. So that's an odd coincidence, right? Then my dad tells me about the night he came home from working second shift to see 3 static beams of light in the sky emanating from the state forest. Like laser beams, going almost all the way across the sky and bending at a 45-degree angle up up into the atmosphere. He observed this phenomena for over an hour and woke up my mother, who corroborated his sighting. This happened around the same year as my thing. Finally, they both told me that about 2 years before my incident, more than one neighbor, 3 in fact, reported seeing similar disc-shaped objects entering and exiting the state forest more than once. So that's some food for thought. What freaks me out the most isn't the actual sighting, but how it's isolated, remembering nothing before or after. I'm still at a complete loss to it all. Now, I've only told this story to a few people, because the few times I have told it, no one believes me, and it's pointless to tell people if they think you're making it up. It was witnessed by not only myself, when I was 16 or 17, but also my mother, 40s at the time, brother, 13, and sister, 11, as well as a number of neighbors on the street. We lived in a suburb just outside of Boston in a house on a fairly large hill. At the bottom of the hill was an apartment complex about 3 to 4 stories high, and to the side of the complex was a large park with a few baseball fields on the left, and on the right, a Walgreens. I was inside cooking grilled chicken as I had just got home from wrestling practice, and my mother opened the front door, having just returned from grocery shopping with my siblings. And she's yelling for me to get outside quickly. When I eventually get outside on the porch, they are all standing there staring up in the direction of the bottom of the hill. As I look, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Hovering over the apartment complex, maybe 100 feet or less above the roof, is your stereotypical flying saucer shape. So close I could make out each individual metallic panel making up the sides of the saucer, and where they join to the next, as well as the circular lights on it. Again, this is broad daylight, right before it started getting dark. We all just stared at it a while. I noticed some neighbors staring as well. The next thing I remember is being back in the kitchen finishing up cooking. I don't remember anything regarding when I stopped looking at it, or when I re-entered the house. To this day, no one besides myself really mentions it. And when I do, they don't remember much else either, besides looking at it and not knowing what to make of it. This is one of those things that has bothered me my whole life since then. I'm now 31 male, and I will probably never know what was in it or what it was doing. Absolutely crazy. I live in the Boston area in a small complex, and it must have been about 10 or 11 or so. I was playing video games and I decided to take a break, so I stepped out onto the balcony to have a smoke. I was looking around the sky at nothing in particular. To my right, I noticed 5 or 6 flying orange lights that looked like candles burning in the distance. I watched them drift off in a sort of upward-forward direction until they seemed to disappear into the clouds. Afterwards, I noticed a plane flying from the other direction, towards the same general area. I knew it was a regular passenger plane. It had the blinking lights on it, and they flew over here all the time. I couldn't tell if it was cloudy, but the plane sort of disappeared from view in a few seconds too, so it must have been. I looked back one more time to the right, and one more orange dot/flame drifted along the same path by itself, coming from the same direction, and disappeared into the same spot in the clouds. I called my girlfriend to come look and tell me what she thinks, because she works at the airport. She was tired and didn't want to get out of bed, so I watched it by myself. I don't know what I saw. My mind didn't jump to aliens or something supernatural as I watched it. I thought maybe it was a group of very high-flying drones or maybe helicopters. The thing is, they were steady lights. No blinking lights like most normal commercial aircraft would have. And I found the formation and flight path or movement kind of odd.